So I've not made a video on my Voodoo Bizango Carbon for a little while now, and I'm almost coming up to a year of ownership. Therefore, I'd like to do a small review of the costs involved of purchasing and upgrading this bike, as I believe it's truly one of the cheapest ways to get your hands on a decent carbon fibre XC or trail bike with modern geometry. I'll also compare this to some potentially other great options, as I know this bike is becoming quite rare to find now. So to summarise this bike in its stock form, it's a 29er carbon fibre framed hardtail with SRAM 1x12 SX, 120mm RockShox duty forks and a 66.5 degree head angle. I've got another video on my channel going over the bike in its stock form in a bit more detail with my first impressions. So the bike weighed in at a pretty heavy 13.1 kilograms with pedals in a size large, which for trail riding is absolutely fine, but wouldn't really cut it for any sort of competitive cross-country riding. So I decided to make a number of upgrades to the bike to increase the performance while keeping the costs as low as possible, as I was planning on getting into some cross-country racing before we got locked down. So the bike, brand new from the shop, retailed for £1,000, but I was lucky enough to get this bike second hand a week before the start of the UK lockdown for a very decent price of £650. Although nowadays there has been some people taking advantage of the current bike shortage and specifically the rarity of this bike, selling as high as £1,500. Despite this, I would still only advise paying £650 to £800 depending on the bike's condition, as it is quite a risk buying second-hand carbon fibre frames, especially as the warranty is only for the first owner. So next, moving on to the upgrades that I've done. So I started out by converting the bike to tubeless. This cost me £52.50 for the valves, tape and sealant. Now it was really worthwhile doing this, as the limited protection of the Ardent tyres meant that I was getting through so many inner tubes on the sharp shell rocks that I ride on. Secondly, the stock rear wheel on this bike is commonly known for its bearing problems, and after just having enough of dealing with it, I decided to swap to this DT Swiss X1900 rear wheel, costing £151. The RockShox duty forks that this bike came with was actually pretty good, but was quite heavy and had a very harsh feeling high-speed compression dampening. For these reasons, I decided to swap them for these Fox Rhythm 34s, which I got on sale for around £270. While this was the most expensive upgrade, it did completely change the feel of the bike, making it much stiffer and more controlled in the corners, while being much more comfortable over the rocks and roots. In addition to these upgrades, I also changed a number of other parts on the bike to suit my preferences. I've got videos which go over these upgrades in more detail, so do check them out if you are interested. Overall, with the bike and all of its upgrades, it cost me £1,220. Now, if I included the money recouped from the old components, the total out-of-pocket cost of this bike is £1,050, which for a bike that now weighs in at 12.3 kilograms is pretty damn good. So after putting this bike together, what would I recommend to others if they're looking at building a similar bike? Well, if you're going to be riding cross-country fire roads or paths with the occasional blue and red trail, a bike such as this is going to be really well suited to you. It will be quick and efficient on the climbs and provide a good level of control on the descents. However, if you're often flying through rock gardens or like to do big jumps, you may be taking a slight risk on the durability of the carbon frame, especially at this cheaper price point. For a similar price to this, you could get a brand new caliber boss nut, a Boardman MHT 9.8 or a Vitus Sentia 29, and all with aluminium frames, you're far less limited on what you can and can't ride. Therefore, if you're a beginner, I highly suggest that you steer clear of this bike. Not only are you far more likely to crash and damage the frame, but you'll also want to progress to larger features on the trails as you progress your riding. Now I understand that with the inflated second-hand bike prices at the moment, I've been very lucky to build this bike for the price that I did. However, I did spend a number of weeks researching the bike and its upgrades before purchasing. This allowed me to search for the best deals, and with some luck I was able to get this bike to where I wanted, well within budget. So before buying the Bizango Carbon, I was always intrigued about the cheap Chinese frames that you see on eBay, but having costed one up to build, I actually found that it would be slightly more expensive than the Bizango. So I'm really happy with the options that I've taken, but I would advise anyone thinking of doing a similar thing to really do your research into the bikes and the potential upgrades that you're going to make. If you're somebody who's on the fence about buying a bike at the moment, I'd think about waiting for the current bike shortage to clear, and also the potential to snap up some bargains when the market inevitably floods from a drop in demand. So I hope this video has given you a bit more of an insight into the costs involved with building a bike such as this one. I've got some videos coming up on some alternative cheaper bikes, so make sure you subscribe for that. I'm also doing a month-long challenge to ride this £200 retro mountain bike, so make sure you check out the first video in the series if you're interested. Anyway, I'd like to thank you so much for watching, and as always, ride safe.